Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Saida Rukshida. It is my honor to be the National Honorary General Secretary of IABP, Indian Association of Biological Psychiatry. And we're very happy and excited to be here today. It's not just because it's a special First Friday CME series, but also because we have a special surprise in store for everybody who's joined in. So I really am giddy with excitement and I cannot wait. Because of that, I'm going to go ahead and invite our President of IABP, Dr. Garg sir, to join us and share what we are going to do today. And Sir, Dr. Garg sir is, of course, President, and he's really held my hand throughout everything, including what we are going to do today. So, Dr. Garg sir, please join us and share a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Ruksida. Good evening, all. Hearty welcome to webinar organized by Indian Association of Biological Psychiatry. 7th April 2023 is very much important for us, not because it is a World Health Day, and not because it is a day for First Friday CME, but because we are going to launch our first newsletter. The idea of publishing a newsletter was given by Dr. Sunil Mittal, our Vice President, but the idea was materialized by Dr. Ruksida Saida, our General Secretary, with the support of Dr. Priyanka and Dr. Jagjot Singh. This is really a matter of great pride and pleasure that first time any organization in India is coming with a newsletter, particularly articles on the latest development in biological psychiatry, some theme subjects, some quiz, so many items. And I think in coming days, we will be coming with a better and more better version of the newsletter. So I request Dr. Saida to kindly share the first newsletter with our audience. Great. As we are able to see latest update in neuroscience, then the topic of the First Friday CME, reset your dopamine in addiction phase of science, or the quiz item, and further drug reviews and case vignettes, and further the events, news updates, and in future we will be able to add more and more things. So I congratulate Dr. Ruksida Saida and her team, Dr. Priyanka and Jagjot Singh, for doing their marvelous work for bringing out this first newsletter of Indian Association of Biological Psychiatry. With these words, over to Dr. Ruksida.
Thank you so much, sir. With this, I invite our Vice President, Dr. Sunil Mittal, sir, to share a few words.
Thank you, Rukshida, and thank you for making this happen. I think you and your team have really brought it out well. You know, we discussed this some meetings ago, and one thought that whether it's going to happen or not remains to be seen. And we know that once you get at it, and now you have other two people assisting you or helping you, and it's come out very well. The newsletters come out very well. And like Dr. Garg has mentioned, that I'm sure more and more interest is going to grow. And as interest grows, it's also going to grow with more features and more other contributions as they may come in. And with this launch, IABP is going to enter into another phase of connecting with its members. I think, and that's very important. And the way you brought it out with the latest, sort of snippets or just references or what's happening. Here is a quick reference guide. It's like for for people my age, it makes the task easier. So here is something screened by younger people, and I need to read this. So thank you for this. And Dr. Garg has made things change in IABP.
Thank you.
And that's his unique quality. And of course, Dr. Pramod, who is he's a pillar of many organizations, but IABP most certainly. And of course, his own pioneering work, as we know, in neuromodulation now with his deep TMS installed. So that's going to probably see some things coming from him. So with this, my best wishes to the editorial team of the newsletter, the IABP, all the executive and members.
Thank you, sir.
Over to you. And thanks once again.
Thank you, sir. And like you very well said, sir, Dr. Pramod Kumar has been a pillar for support every time I get stumped. And, sometimes when I can't get in touch with Dr. Garg, he's my go-to person. He's always been there. Dr. Pramod, please share a few words, sir.
Thank you, Rukshita, and thank you very much, Dr. Garg and Dr. Sunil Mittal, for the encouraging words about the organization and about me as well. See, this is an area which I believe biological psychiatry in India is there since many years, I think. But the work in this particular area has always been restricted to very limited places. We know that only the institutions. And we now with this, this was one of my passion to go for this neuromodulation. And I always, as a practice, to do some my own research, my experience and research in this area. And maybe after a few months, once it's only about 3 months with me, and we have got patients being done on TMS every day. I think maybe in the next few months, once I have the adequate data, because I'm collecting data, which I'm always fond of, and maybe at some stage I will be able to make my data present in some of the CME or a conference over there. And as such, biological psychiatry and the the key leaders, it's a growing organization in terms of membership, in terms of the content. And this Friday CME is very, very unique. The way the topics are chosen and the faculty is being very carefully chosen, and the way the people participate, it's very, very good for any organization and for the members. This concept of a newsletter, I still remember in the last meeting, Dr. Sunil Mittal brought it out. I think this is something which is a 4-page, 5-page, very handy thing for you, which you can always read. And it's a PDF form on your phone. Anyway, on the way you can read about it. And this dopamine. What I've read, what I've experienced in the last 2-3 years with the COVID, especially when digitalization had reached its peak during this period, people are so keen, people are so known. They have become, their vocabulary, patients, they come with dopamine, serotonin, sertraline, GABA. Dopamine has become so popular. So many reels come on dopamine, serotonin. So these are the words which are very, very catchy. And I always find it very interesting when people talk about it. So I think with this, I'm always there for any organization, biological psychiatry. And I think this CME is very, very good. I especially thanks Rukshita and this team for bringing it out. And thank you very much. And again, let's enjoy the Friday CME.
Thank you so much, sir. So with that, I'll quickly introduce my team who thankfully have not learned to say no to me yet. Dr. Priyanka Pandey from Mumbai and Dr. Jagjot Singh from Ludhiana. Thank you so much. These are our young budding psychiatrists and in fact, very newly minted IABP members. And I'm so glad that I can delegate so easily and so without any kind of hesitation, and they deliver right on time, and they're excellent at proofreading as well. So full marks to both of them. Thank you so much, team. And with that, I once again congratulate the entire team of IABP and for the successful launch of this newsletter. My joint secretary, Dr. Majid, our editor, Dr. Ali Siddiqui, our treasurer, Dr. Prasanjit Ghosh, and of course our ex officio, Dr. G. Prasad Rao, sir, who was president, and Dr. Avinash D'Souza, who was secretary. Thank you so much for always being there, and our EC members who are always just a click or a call away. Thank you so much, everyone. And with this, the newsletter is officially launched. We will see to it that we circulate every newsletter to all our members. Having said that, it will also be available on our website. So even if somebody wants to go and look at a back issue, they're more than welcome to do that. With this, we also invite all our members to share content, come up with ideas. We have a fun section as well where we have brain teasers like MCQs and a meme and everything. So if you all have anything like that to share, please do so. And hopefully this will also be a very good vehicle for us to let our members know what our upcoming events are going to be. And of course, anything anybody is doing, just like, we are looking forward to hearing more about the research from Dr. Pramod. We will definitely want to announce there. So use this for more as more of increasing a network and circuitry within our members and the extended psychiatry community of India. With that, thank you so much. And I invite our chairperson of today's First Friday CME series, Dr. Garg sir, to take over the proceedings and start the CME for today, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ruksida. Thank you very much. So let us start our First Friday CME. Today's topic is very much interesting. Reset your dopamine in addiction behavior, fed or science. Actually, the day one when we joined the psychiatry, the day one teacher asked about the serotonin or dopamine, and this is still continuing. And I think when we leave the MD examination, even then the dopamine and serotonin and all these words are always echoing in our mind. I'm not a person who can talk over this subject. We are having a very learned speaker with us, Dr. Hema Tharoor. Can we share the CV of Dr. Hema Tharoor? I think it is very much difficult to read out the full CV of Dr. Hema Tharoor. We have prepared a very
just give me a sec, sir.
Brief CV. Dr. Hema Tharoor is a senior consultant at SCARF and Apollo Spectra hospitals with over 20 years of experience in the field of psychiatry. Dr. Tharoor has received the Dr. TMA Pi Gold Medal for excellence in medical research and contributed to other awards such as the Dhruv Kumar Award for Best Paper in Psychotherapy twice. She completed postdoctorate in NIH Fogarty Fellow and published in ADHD and lithium pharmacogenomics. Dr. Tharoor has over 45 publications in international and national index journals and co-authored several chapters in book in psychiatry. So I welcome Dr. Hema Tharoor in today's webinar. We are having a very learned moderator with us, Dr. Gayatri Bhatia. Dr. Gayatri Bhatia completed her MD in psychiatry from Bharati Vidyapith, Pune in 2018. And her super specialization in addiction psychiatry from the National Drug Dependence Treatment Center, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, India. She is currently working as Assistant Professor, Department of Psychiatry at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Rajkot. Winner of 11 international and 3 national awards, author of 30+ published original papers, 5 national guidelines, and 5 textbook chapters. She holds a special interest in women and adolescent mental health, substance use disorders, harm reduction, along with legal and policy aspect of substance use disorders. I welcome Dr. Gayatri Bhatia. So with these words, I invite Dr. Hema Tharoor to kindly present her lecture on the topic, and we will be taking question answers in the last with the help of the moderator, Dr. Gayatri Bhatia. Dr. Hema Tharoor, please.
Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Garg, for that very sweet words. And at the outset, I think I want to thank Dr. Rukshida when she called up and said she wanted me to, speak on this first Friday CME. I thought I will do something different because I think Dr. Pramod highlighted, it's been the last few years post-pandemic, we've been hearing so much of dopamine, and I just wanted to throw it to the audience. Till date, I think when we look at addiction, we tend to look at substances. And now we are in an age of literally an overindulgence age where everything is in plenty. So I think all of us are addicts in this forum right now. So it'll be interesting in the next 20, 25 minutes after my talk to just ponder about what addiction each one of you have and what do you guys want to quit. And I just wanted to highlight, there's a lot of noise about doing detox, and just wanted to show the nice mixture of the art and science and the whole noise about dopamine. So with this introduction, I just wanted to start with this slide that says that to dopamine, any drug is a drug, and today drugs are 24/7. So you have the access, quantity, variety.
Dr. Hema, if you could just start your slide share, please.
Oh, it's not.
And no, you have to start the screen share again.
Oh,
Thank you.
Is it visible?
No, not yet.
1 second.
Um,
1 second. I screen shared it earlier. I mean, it's taking a bit of a time. 1 second.
no problem.
1 minute. Rukshita, let me just send it to you so that we won't we won't waste people's time.
Sure.
I've sent it to you.
I'll start the screen as soon as I get it. Why don't you go ahead with your...
Yeah, I'll start.
Yes.
So the entire premise of this talk is to sort of highlight that if we look at our smartphone as a hypodermic needle and the kind of access that we have to social media, and I think one of the seniors here mentioned about the whole social media influence and how addictive the whole digitalization has been. It's very interesting to see how much of, like, if you look at the history of dopamine, how much of the whole high that people would achieve with, I'm talking about evolution per se, where dopamine was considered as an important neurotransmitter involved in, yes, movement in search of food, to now where we could just download Zomato or Swiggy and we would get food instantly. So it's very fascinating to present the landscape of this whole addiction, and how much of, how much of access people have in terms of with the smartphone, that's creating constant dopamine, peaks and crashes. So what's very, very beautiful about dopamine, the molecule, is that the molecule is released in a tonic and a phasic fashion. And it's very, very important that all of us have a baseline dopamine activity in our body. And depending on the addiction that you have or what you're addicted to, there is always a release of dopamine based on how much you're addicted to. And as you develop tolerance, you sort of hit a high from your original baseline. And definitely once you reach a threshold, you crash. Now, the next time you sort of go into the same activity, your baseline is higher because your threshold has gone up. So then the peak could remain the same. You would reach the peak at the same time. But because you need much more of the activity, again, the crash becomes as hard and you go into a dopamine deficit. So the purpose would be to sort of look at these things and help us understand how much of dopamine deficit is there and what would happen. Rukshida?
Next slide.
Yeah, I can't see the, 1 second.
We are able to see it.
No, sir. Okay. Because I can't see any of you all. So it seems like.
But you can see the screen, right?
Yeah, that's okay. I can.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know which slide you are in. So.
Oh, you can't see.
Okay. Now. Okay, fine. Is it okay just for my flow if all of you could just 2 minutes bear with me and I just go back and.
Sure.
Yeah, so this is it. I wanted to just, I think we are in an overloaded world. I know for lack of time, otherwise I thought I'll just take a call on how many of you are addicted to Twitter. I definitely see a lot of porn, food, sex addiction. It's called orthorexia, people addicted to exercise, staying fit in a certain way. There is this whole, I think there's an old obsession because, I mean, I'm using here obsession more in terms of semantics, where there is overconsumption because of the number of stuff that we could do, from feeling good to being over good. And it's very, very interesting that this is one concept I wanted to introduce, where it's like a seesaw, the pain pleasure process that's happening in our brain. And like I talked about dopamine homeostasis, but what is nice is when we hit the pleasure and then we hit a threshold and then when dopamine crashes, there is a shift of the gremlins to the, into the pain zone. And once, till the deficit is sort of, resolved, that's when all the craving kicks in and the person is, so for example, I don't know how many GOT fans are there. I remember when the series came out, or any other Netflix, like Family Man, I remember, a lot of people binged, we're addicted to it. So it is like each one has your own addiction until you finish that. It's like a seesaw. So just imagine a seesaw where pleasure and pain pathway is reactivated. there's always the body tries to achieve a homeostasis. So now there is this huge, I use the word fad for this topic because it's interesting. If you just Google, it's amazing from the Stanford professor. I mean, it's very nice. I would advise people who are interested in addiction. It's a bit tad long. He's called Andrew Huberman, his podcast on the whole dopamine, to Anna Lemick's book on Dopamine Nation, from which I was very inspired when I read the book. And a lot of, from everybody, nutritionists to all kinds of people talking about dopamine. And like Professor Garg said, this whole thing about, the whole dopamine obsession is here to stay. Next slide. So I just wanted to, so what's fascinating is the novelty, the quantity, I'm talking about the digital world, how potent the whole addiction to the digital world is, and the accessibility and availability, right? I mean, look at us today. The fact that we could, on a swipe, get anything and everything is just amazing, and how addictive it can be. The next slide. So I just wanted to introduce this whole Goldilocks principle. All of us remember the three bears, and just the right amount is what we all aspire. And if you go back to neurobiology, that's what would be ideal. And too much of getting a dopamine high would lead down to a path of depression and addiction. We all know that, but I thought this concept seemed very, very sweet to remember. And just for everybody listening in, that too little, you feel very little motivation. Too much, you'll crash as hard. So just wanted to introduce that. Next slide, please. So like I just said, all of us are very, very familiar with the nigrostriatal, which controls movement, the mesocortical pathway where it communicates for motivation and learning. And by and large, this whole concept of reward seeking, and in a few slides, I'll mention about how interesting the whole reward seeking behavior, and how the focus now is on if you could regulate for the effort that you're going to put in and not the outcome, and how you can keep in mind that, looking at long-term prosperity rather than the immediate high you get about doing anything that you are hooked onto. So, just wanted to again repeat, like if you go back to history and you read about dopamine, because that's how our species are most evolved, with the whole dopamine, surge causing us to look for food and hunting and shelter. And now where we are completely a digital nation, with dopamine being in the forefront. So just wanted to, for very young psychiatrists listening in, to say that how much now for me in 25 years, this whole food and shelter concept doesn't hold true anymore in this digital world. Next, please. So one huge concept that is thrown about in increasing natural way, and it's this whole cold water exposure. I really went into reading a lot about it, and it's very interesting. Neurophysiology journals talking about studies in Europe. They say 11 minutes, totally 11 minutes in a week. The focus is on the amount of cold you can tolerate. So there is, of course, the studies talk about 7 degrees. I'm coming from Chennai. You put me in 7 degrees, I'm going to kill you. So I think people up north, y'all are okay with the 7. Right now, I think we are at 36 degrees here. So cold water bath, cold water exposure. So basically the neuropinnings for this is to say that you have an acute stress reaction to the cold. There is the norepinephrine, adrenaline, and associated. So it's an acute stress response initially, again, activating the body, then immediately reacts to protect itself. Dopamine is released. Studies are still going. This was proof of concept to a small population done. So they've done 2 in humans, they've looked at full immersion with the, your head is above a pool of water, to having a cold shower, but definitely cold water exposure improving dopamine levels. Like I've mentioned here, chocolate and sex, nicotine, cocaine is 2.5x, more dopamine is released. So there is a lot of work on looking at thermal regulation, how much of cold water, and incidentally, I have a lot of people propagating water therapy, exposing yourself to 30 minutes of water. But this is something worth, interesting read on cold water exposure and cold water baths. Next slide. Just wanted to, with full homage to the today's CME, I just don't want to leave this behind. So to just talk about, for a minute, to just glance at, we all know the mesocortical, nigrostriatal, mesolimbic, and just highlighting how much pleasure and reward is pathways are hugely coexisting and very important for addiction, emotion, and perception, and very, very important to understand the dopamine circuitry, and again, the upregulation of dopamine, and how once you have the crash, you are downregulated, the serotonin's feedback inhibition. I'm not going details into that because I want to highlight a lot of very interesting dopamine-related research and underpinnings, which I think we could, again, take it to practice. What we know in research, how we could, when we are dealing with behavioral addictions, and even for us, I think this would be an interesting take-home message. Next slide, please. This is another very interesting thing about looking at how the addicted brain, and again, looking at how, see, I think before the slides came up, I was talking in terms of a baseline homeostasis, which all of us, there is a baseline release of dopamine. And to just see that in a recreational user's brain, the green graph, there is the tonic phasic release of dopamine. But in an addicted brain, because there is the peak, the amount that is taken varies from depending on how much you're exposed to. There is the crash, and then the brain needs some time to go back into normalcy. Roughly, research talks about 30 days to achieve homeostasis. So most detox, the whole 30-day period is mentioned with the brain recovery. I just mentioned about the seesaw, the gremlin between pleasure and pain. Of course, Light talks about misery, the whole, swing between pleasure and misery, and how there is this whole brain mechanism to ensure that the homeostasis is achieved. Next slide, please. So how you are destroying your peak dopamine levels and brain neuroplasticity with addiction is very, very important, because every time, see, nowadays with the digitalization, you could be doing multi-layered activities. You could, you could be exercising, you could still be on your phone, you could be hearing something. So when you do multi-layered activities, you're sort of achieving multiple, you're hitting, like there's this whole talk about dopamine hits. You are sort of having peak dopamine levels, creating a lot of, if I can use for a better word, creating a lot of confusion for the brain. And depending on, so when you do so many activities at the same time, the crash that follows is pretty, there is a differential crash depending on how much time you're spending on each substance. When I say here substance, I mean on each activity that you're doing. And then the brain takes a longer time to recover, affecting your sleep-wake cycle. And especially if you're going to, into the night with digital activity, it's really going to more and more addictive and more withdrawal because of that. Next slide. So just to reiterate what I said, there's a baseline level of dopamine in your brain and body all the time. and depending on how you feel, the tonic release of dopamine, and you are experiencing peaks above the baseline, and that's called the phasic release of dopamine. Next slide, please. So just to show the slide, so you reach a, there is a baseline of tonic release, you go into the first peak, and then it takes some time to reach the baseline, depending on what I just said, what you're addicted to. So just for people who are sort of getting familiar with this, just remember the tonic release just refers to the minimal amount of dopamine circulating in your body, and just your motivation to get out of bed, you'll go to work, you want to earn your salary rather than sleep on your couch. And this minimum dopamine is what that helps you to maintain fundamental functions. And all of us have different baseline levels of dopamine, and some of them, it's all got to do, I mean, there are other hormones involved, we all know that, but here, since I'm sticking on to our favorite molecule, I just want to highlight on this more. And the phasic release refers to dopamine induced by pleasurable stimuli. Like here, like I wanted to talk about food, Twitter, Facebook, Instagramming. Instagram is the new villain these days, I think. And the dopaminergic spike above our baseline is just because it's creating a sort of suspense for the brain, right? Because you're going on swiping and you're going on watching one thing after the other, that the phasic release happens multiple times to the brain. And it has to crash. It cannot keep on going in peaks. Next slide. So just this, what I explained about the baseline increasing. If you look at the graph on the right, and how there is, the peak remains the same, but it takes a lot of time to reach baseline. Won't waste time here because I referred to it in the beginning. Next slide, please. And also remember that because of I talked about peak, and what comes down, what goes up has to come down. So you may feel motivated to go for a run, you may be having a coffee, then you do music, you do multiple, like you could drive, you could listen to your FM radio, you could be doing so many things at one time that after every peak, remember there is a crash that's also happening to you. Next slide, please. So this crash, the peak crash, is called the dopamine deficit, the time it takes to reach the baseline, and like I mentioned about the 30 days period. Next. So how do we release? I talked about it: exercising, listening to music, food, sex, and of course, multiple activities that I talked about. Next slide, please. Constantly, when you fulfill your dopamine, just like somebody who's addicted, remember that every time you're going to do multiple sources and new doses of pleasure, and you consume it more and more, your brain starts looking. I mean, it's like it wants to get to the peaks more and more. And then the crashes that happen are leaving, you're taking longer time to reach it leads to a chronic deficit state. That is what I wanted to highlight here. Next slide. So between addicted to getting focused, how there is a lot of literature to sum this up on dopamine detox. Next slide. Before detox, you could be all this. I mean, we mentioned about online, Instagram, too. You want to come to this state of where you're reading. I will be highlighting that to just somebody, I think Professor Anna Lemick from Stanford says, just try being bored. Don't do anything and just try being bored. That would be interesting in discussion to see. So again, there's this whole talk about dopamine diet. So all of us, junk food, if you look at dating apps, video games, to on your right side, eat healthy, intentional dating, try and read a book. If you look at the thing on the left side where stimulants, try and cut it down, no headphones, no social media, no YouTube, this whole thing about dopamine detox. Next one. Again, like I talked about, dopamine as a superpower. So just to give you the units, coffee costing about 87 units. I mean, if you keep consuming too much of coffee, again, from the sex addiction data, from gambling data, of course, yawning written here as 0. Next one. So there is this talk about dopamine fast. And I think this was in the New York Times, where you're actually not fasting from dopamine. It's like you're creating a digital fast, so that, remember, dopamine is always circulating in your system. You have a baseline levels of dopamine. So you're literally not fasting from dopamine, but you are sort of, and I think there's an editorial written there so that people really thought that you could fast and then create something to your dopamine. But remember that what you could do is, like I just mentioned about, there's a lot of talk about meditation, journaling, taking a walk. Like I mentioned about Professor Anna, she talks about somebody whom ended up, she treated for alcohol, and then this person ended up with severe compulsive water drinking, water intoxication, addiction to water. And so, in fact, she was asked, like, what was your weirdest addiction that you've treated? And she said, water. So just to keep that in mind, and this whole concept about, again, dopamine fast, talking about intermittent fasting and watching what you eat, because now eating has become the next big addiction. Next one, please. Very important to just summarize so far to say about dopamine history, and that right now, as I speak, there's so many dopamine stimulating activities, and you are abusing, all of us in this audience could be abusing it without knowing that you're actually abusing it to a certain great degree. So if you're playing video games, listening to music, substance, talking to your friends simultaneously, online chatting or otherwise, you're layering so many. So multi-layering is what is been advised to reduce. So if you talk to patients, find out if they're multi-layering. And remember, I just talked about from meaningless pleasurable activities to when you go to activities which create a lot of pleasure, you're going into an unmotivated state very fast because you can't keep up to the peak and crash. So please break. You must tell people to break from multi-layering activity. And what is advised is to use random methods of doing it without telling the brain that every day you'll play a video game. So it's very, very essential you do that. And again, this 30-day is suggested where you pick one activity. So if you had somebody who comes to you with gaming, a lot of screen time, and he says he's gaming or playing poker or gambling online, pick one activity from which he could detox for 30 days and separate the multi-layering. Next slide. So this is very important. See, if you're doing multi-layered, you hit the first peak with one activity, second peak with one activity, you're all going to crash. Takes a long time to hit the baseline. So this is why most of them lose sleep. You wake up in the morning, and all of this, all people who are addicted to screens and multiple activities talk about a lack of motivation in the morning. And then the return to the baseline takes a lot of time. Next slide, please. So there is this interesting, do you want to be a beginner, you want to be an intermediate, or a time theorist? So ideally, for somebody who's, so depending on, the ones in red are the number of things that the person is probably hooked on to, and you want to sort of help with them, and the ones in green are what you can ask them to try as part of the detox. So you can ask them to start off as a beginner and then move on to the intermediate. The time theorist is somebody who's reluctant, who's going to be the reluctant participant, but will engage with you in all this, but will really take his time in doing this. Next slide. Remember that ultimately everything, I mean, I'm talking about, again here, pardon me, because again, the slide talks about drugs, but here I am talking about everything behavioral and non-behavioral, addictions and the substance, everything which put together in a nutshell is just flooding your brain reward system with the dopamine. And it's very, very important that as you keep only aiming for reward, and if you keep consistently doing one thing or And when I say one thing at a, because it's so accessible to you, I'm mainly talking about the smartphone. And I liked her reference. Anna talks about the smartphone as your needle. In fact, she says, that's your heroine these days. And if you can keep your smartphone away, you could sort of attack this whole pleasure plane theory and help yourself much better in the long run. Next slide. So this whole intermittent dopamine release is a concept to keep in mind. So keep your dopamine release random. Try not to let the body become accustomed to a particular activity or substance, and avoid letting it predict when dopamine can be expected. Okay. So by keeping your body guessing, so that is what is very, very important, that you'll be fresh without interference from your dopamine. So all of us, each one of us has a specific dopamine history, because each one of us could be doing different multi-layered activities. So now when you're trying to do the detox, just ensure that you end up picking one particular, let's say if I am hooked on to video games, it's better I decide that I'm going to play on Monday and Friday, and not keep myself like, let myself do it every day at a certain time for half an hour. The same applies for the other activities. So if you keep your brain from predicting and expecting spikes, then you're going to, lose out on this intermittent dopamine release. Next. So there are 5 steps in dopamine detox. Avoid multi-layering, randomize, like I just said about intermittent dopamine release. Attach it to effort and not reward, because when you're very reward driven, only reward driven, the amount you use, how potently you will use it, I don't care, I have to get it kind of drive that you would use it, you would cause a lot of the prolonged deficit states. In the long run, you must lower the dose of stimulants and avoid reflexive triggers like smartphones. Allow getting bored. Be present. Be present in the sense, Sunday, I have a lot of people who say Sunday, no phone day. Is it possible in this group? Would be interesting discussion. Again, this whole concept of air bath, meaning just walk out on the sun and feel the air. This sounds very nice. I think for people, Chennai, if I suggested this, I'll probably get slapped with the heat. And this whole is very interesting about radical honesty. The whole concept of when you're treating addiction, be it substance or behavioral, that having radical, honest conversations with the person in a very intimate way increases a lot of dopamine on its own. So very, very interesting that was from a, like when you're interacting with patients. Next slide. So remember, dopamine detox is working because you're bored, and boring stuff becomes more fun. So my big recommendation, big take-home message today is, guys, to weekend, I know it's Easter, and if we all can try 48 hours of boredom, you could use your high dopamine activity as a reward, and cleaning, practicing piano, reading books, doing some sort of exercise, and of course, do any sort of work. I mean, I meant any instrument that you like, walking down the beach, just feel the air, kind of, next slide. So this whole thing, to just keep in mind the good and the bad stimulants, is very, very important. Just reiterating that. Next slide, please. So reset, how do you reset dopamine naturally? One more. So remember using substances. So caffeine, studies on caffeine increasing the adenosine receptor, and by then increasing dopamine levels. So caffeine is recommended to be taken before 11 a.m. Like I was talking about NLMK and Dopamine Nation, and how talked about it increasing dopamine levels. So it's very, very important that you avoid using the use of stimulants, and try to remember each one of us has your own dopamine history. Next slide. This is a very, very, very important, if you guys can look at it, which is D stands for data, dopamine. Spend 30 days collecting data about how many weeks you shop on your essential stuff, whichever you're addicted to. O stands for the objective of what are you getting out of it? What is your problem? Is it, anxiety, depression? Why are you doing it? Remember 30 days of abstinence. A stands for abstinence. M stands for practicing mindfulness. I is what insight and what desire you get out of doing this and how you could build resilience. What are the next steps? Again, this is from Anna's book, an acronym. And E is how would you experiment to abstain? So I thought this dopamine acronym to be used for dopamine detox would be very helpful. Next. I just talked about it, electronics, and I just put up a slide because I'm ending my talk, just to try staying away from offline, ensure you cut off whichever web you're addicted to. Next. So key points, every dopamine peak is followed by a crash. Remember again and again, I think today it's health for all. So I'm discussing everybody present here who I feel is addicted to something or the other. And it's very interesting how in the book, Anna Lemke says she was addicted to romance novels online. So this is for anybody who feels that you're overusing something, because this is an age of abundance and overstimulation resulting in long-term decrease in motivation, depression, and addiction. So the aim is to learn to spike your dopamine intermittently, avoid multi-layering activities, and use stimulants in moderation. Next slide. So concluding, I feel whatever latest fads have appeared, what I mean is with this whole detox fasting, it's also a blessing, and you should know it's the art and science of using dopamine and how you rely on it. And again, to reiterate, I said using it randomly and intermittently would be the best way forward. Next slide. So this is what is being talked about hugely, which I referred to. Next. I just wanted to end with this. People who are interested in should get this book called by Kent Dunnington. He takes he's a philosopher, theologian. He talks about the choice that we have in addiction, right? If most people say that, hey, if the person wants to stop, he stops. Anna Lemke talks a lot about the biology behind addiction, but I liked his quote and I want to highlight it here. Perhaps unlike the addict, we have not demanded an all-consuming purpose, a coherent and integrated life, and an ecstatic participation in sum of all a sufficient and the transcendent good. I thought this, it was an interesting philosophical point of view in addiction. Thank you for a very patient listening. I didn't want to do a very traditional neurobiology of addiction. I just wanted to highlight these points and what's out there in a very academic way so that you could take home this message. Thank you for a very patient listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Hema Tharoor, for giving a very lucid talk on the dopamine and addiction. It is same as usual from you. I think good talk.
त्याच्याबद्दलच बोलून राहिली dopamine addiction.
I think the good talk also increased the dopamine level in the system, and that is the reason that we are having around 80 people who are listening to your talk. So with these words, I invite Dr. Gayatri Bhatia to moderate the session and invite the questions and deal with the question answer session, please. Over to Gayatri.
Thank you, Dr. Garg. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for such an interesting and non-traditional yet full of information presentation. I also thank Dr. Rukshida for organizing the whole thing and getting me on board with it. Well, first of all, as we've gone through these particular slides, what strikes me completely, and as well as I'm looking at the comments, most of the comments that come across are, should we completely avoid, having dopamine in our system? Let me clarify this as ma'am has done already. It is the dopamine spike that we are trying to avoid. We are trying to, with these activities, what we're trying to do is go towards sustained level of dopamines in our systems and to avoid this spike in order to avoid the crash, which makes us do unhealthy things. So I think this will answer around 5 or 6 questions that are already there in the comments. So what we're trying to do is just maintain the levels of dopamine that we already have and to maintain sustained high levels of dopamine. Now, if we look at when we were training for psychiatry, I'm sure we were aware of something called the trait character inventory. So if that concept is applied here, we understand that everybody is driven by some motivation, some kind of life purpose. Some of them, some people are motivated by doing the right thing. Some people are motivated by getting long-standing rewards. Some people are just motivated by hardworking and just the feeling that they're getting closer to their goals. If we need to apply the same thing to avoiding a dopamine surge, what we can do right now here is to analyze what activities will give us a sustained level of dopamine high, not the high of an addiction and not tantamount to something that would want us to seek it again and again at short intervals of time. So something like working out, or maybe practicing a daily routine, or maybe some harmless activities which we can incorporate in our life on a daily basis to get probably something that recharges me for a whole day, or maybe for the next 12 to 13 hours, maybe an hour of meditation in the morning, or just practicing mindfulness, maybe 5 to 10 minutes a day. So these activities are the ones which will probably give us like sustained moderate levels of dopamine. They are not to the level of a particularly what can we say, attractive or lucrative reward that addictions do. And also, consequently, they will not result in a crash, which will probably leave us feeling dysphoric and seeking that activity again and again. One of the questions is also about any real-life neuroradiological dopamine level estimation, or even brain organoid dopamine levels estimated in iPSC-derived brain organoids of addicts show that there is a dopamine surge in addiction. Yes, my friend, there is a lot of research that has happened in estimating the dopamine levels pre and post addictive behavior, and most of them are done by using PET scans. There is a chemical that we call the C11 labeled raclopride, which actually goes and binds the D2 receptors, basically all of the receptors, but D2 are the main incriminants in the addiction behavior. So what they do is they go and bind to the D2 receptors and then they are scanned. So the number of D2 receptors which are active is actually proportional to the amount of dopamine that we have in our system. So this is very easily estimated that way. If you have a friend in probably, or somebody you know in nuclear medicine, they are going to give you a whole discourse on it. This is their bread and butter probably. So
Gayatri,
a lot
if
of
I may add, the whole cold shower the theory that's put forward, it is, neurophysiology journal this year that's published, they've blood dopamine levels again, and serotonin and the cortisol. When I was talking about this whole ice water immersion, that work is there. Yes.
Yes, ma'am, I agree. Yes, ma'am. And yes, so okay. Mad Hatter wants to forget the last 1 hour of his life. I wonder what we've done to him.
Caused a lot of crash, maybe.
I hope not. Okay. Okay, pop psychology peddling. Well, you might be partially right. This is still something new. But if we keep our concept clear of the fact that we are not indulging in unhealthy behaviors that will lead to a short-term increase in dopamine, I think we are on to something here, even though evidence is pointing out when we treat addiction patients on a daily basis, what we tend to do in terms of relapse prevention therapy that we do is A, finding out high risk situations and teaching them how to avoid it, and B, is to provide alternate sources of pleasure. And what we tend to do is alternate sources of pleasure is we are not peddling one addiction for the other. What we are trying to do is do what was talked about in this presentation. That is to find out ways which work for us, which provide us with a sustained level of dopamine. And we're not trying to live without dopamine here, of course not. It is just that we are trying to regulate our levels so that we indulge in healthy behaviors and we get a good sustained amount of dopamine in our system. So nobody's asking us to go on a, live without dopamine, as the fasting would suggest. It's not as austere as it sounds.
And if I may add, I think one more reason for presenting this topic was a lot of patients come and say they're doing the dopamine fast. They want to eat dopamine specific food. So it's very important that we know what it is, the basic thing, so that we could also advise appropriately. And since Google is our doctor parallelly, yeah.
I agree, ma'am. And there's an interesting question which talks about comments on addiction to work. Would certain types of burnout be linked to this? Okay. I've recently uncovered a lot of work when it comes to professional quality of life, and burnout and secondary traumatic stress are central tenets to it. So when we talk about compassion satisfaction, compassion fatigue, there are two what can we say, other ends of the balances that work for a professional quality of life. So yes, there is some concept of work addiction which will contribute to burnout in the end, because the more you work, the lesser amount of dopamine you will get. This is I'll be referring back to the diagram that ma'am talked about, when after repeated exposure to a particular behavior which induces a dopamine spike, the peak of the spike will keep on decreasing and the crash duration will keep increasing. This is called dopamine checkpoint reset. So in addiction behaviors, when the dopamine checkpoint keeps getting reset after a particular exposure or long-term exposure to that amount of drug or behavior, we will not be getting dopamine out of it, but we will be getting more and more sensitive to the crash that happens. And once we stop getting motivation out of our out of the activity that we are indulging in, then it's not an addictive behavior anymore. So also to just go into pure biological aspect of it, burnout is related more to serotonin as it is compared to dopamine. So while there is some aspect of dopamine in its treatment, it's not the central hormone, which is the central neurotransmitter which is at work here. So again, as rewards and punishments are parts of learning, how would dopamine fasts affect learning? Okay, again, we are not talking about living without dopamine. We are just talking about keeping healthy levels of dopamine and indulging in non-harmful activities. So while we still have dopamine in our system, we are having it at a sustained level. It's not the peak and spike which will, encourage learning or encourage de-learning or long-term potentiation. It is actually with the set point levels that we have. I think we're mostly done with the questions. If there's anything that we've forgotten, I would like to ask somebody to help me.
Dr. Gayatri,
Sir.
People usually go to temple in the morning before going to their workplace. So is there any biology of that particular activity of a person to going to temple, which is going to increase the dopamine level or sustaining the dopamine level before going? Because it is a ritual in most of people who do this practice, and I think they are. We have seen that these people who are going to temple, they are more active in their daily lives. So, what are your comments over this?
This is a very interesting question, sir. I really thank you for asking this question, because one thing is that, as ma'am said, indulging in a routine activity is generally related to sustained levels of dopamine release. Going to the temple, following religious activities have always had a very high social acceptance and a very high personal acceptance in our own life. So if we do something like that, then not only are we validating our own, good selves in our own eyes, we are also having a good amount of social support with what we are doing. So sometimes even when motivation for going to the temple fails, it's the social pressure or the social motivation that comes to play. So yes, doing something of a routine which is that highly placed in our in our value system is definitely going to be working on dopamine levels, and indulging in such a routine is going to provide us with sustainedly released dopamine levels, which will more or less be one of the things that we might even go for a dopamine detox system. Also, there are so many other other factors that religiosity can help. Religiosity and addiction is a full branch of addiction studies where a lot of people have dedicated their lives to. So people who are more religious, they tend to have certain unhealthy beliefs or even certain reservations against experimentation, which tend to become more harm avoidant in the future. So children, it is seen most probably children who are growing up in a religious environment, they tend to experiment less. They have a fear of experiment and a good amount of harm avoidance, which are favorable traits in terms of addictive behaviors. That helps. So even if such a habit is inculcated right from the childhood, there are a lot of positive beliefs and positive reinforcing beliefs that people have about themselves. And once they start doing that, self-esteem issues, they reduce, doubts about self reduce. There is greater resilience to peer pressure, and there is a greater need for social acceptance. All of these factors, they go against somebody who might start using substances or start engaging in addictive behaviors in the presence of peer influence, which is one of the biggest cause of initiating of substance use by young people. So having something of a routine which is so socially acceptable is definitely a good factor. Not just for childhood, even once they develop into adulthood, I think a lot of problems or a lot of issues are avoided.
And sir, if I may, like she said, a lot of work on the right brain, spirituality, creativity. There's a lot of work talking about limbic dopamine and prefrontal, more of serotonin's work. Scrupulosity is the word used, whether it's a ritual obsession. So more of serotonin playing a role. And again, we all know that more serotonin inhibitory to dopamine. So the levels of dopamine are a little low. And the pleasure coming more from the serotonin effects in spirituality.
So definitely there is some biology in the spirituality.
100%.
Yeah. Thank you. So any more questions from the audience? Dr. Ruksida is here, I think. We can invite Dr. Ruksida. Yes.
I think
So
there is one from Dr. Malay, I think, in the end. I can read it out. Dr. Malay Dave says, what about the so many other neurobiological systems, example, endocannabinoid, opioid systems involved in addiction behaviors? Does dopamine fasting do anything to these? Why focus on dopamine alone in addictions?
I think it's more to, no, point taken completely, because it's all these systems involved together. But the fact is, because like I think one of the seniors mentioned, what's in a name, where I can say that because there's so much of focus, it's amazing that I was just looking at, Journal of Biochemistry. It's only about dopamine, this whole obsession about dopamine. And with given, so to answer your question very scientifically, endocannabinoids, I think somebody's mentioned about endorphins coming from the pain receptor. So all this acknowledged, but since we are living in a world where there is this whole, like if you read about the amount of publications related to dopamine fasting, detox, the effects of dopamine, the misnomer about fasting. So I just wanted, this is health for all, we should be aware, give a different spin to today's CME. So I will take the blame on just focusing on dopamine, but your point completely taken that the other systems are involved. And I didn't go into the other systems for lack of time, and just wanted to highlight this.
absolutely. So I think Dr. Ruksida, it is time is over, or we are still having time for discussion?
So it's entirely up to the chair, so I leave to your discretion.
I think this is the time to summarize the things. And as usual, Dr. Hema Tharoor gave a very lucid presentation on the addiction and role of dopamine and as Dr. Malad Dave raised the question, definitely there are so many other domains in the addictions, but definitely all are having different avenues, and definitely we will having a more we will have to have a more time for discussions for each and every aspect of addiction. And thank you very much, Dr. Hema Tharoor, and thank you, Dr. Gayatri, for moderating a session in a very professional way. And I think she is expert in addiction psychiatry, so she was able to do the justice with the job. And I'm sure in future CMEs we will be having her participation in a big way. And thanks, Dr. Ruxida, for coordinating with CME committee and choosing the topics which are very much not only scientific but are very much clinical. With very much clinical approach subjects which are very much important in our clinical practice. So thank you very much, Dr. Ruxida, Dr. G. Prasad Rao, Dr. Majid, Dr. Nitin Gupta for developing a series of First Friday's CME and choosing the topics. And best thing is that you are selecting the faculty because every time you are coming with a faculty who are the expert in our country. So with these words, I express my sincere thanks to Dr. Ruxida for organizing CME, and thanks to our faculty, Dr. Hema Tharoor and Dr. Gayatri Bhatia. Thank you, viewers, for their active participation and making this CME lively. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you so much, sir. With that, we come to an end of another edition of this curated series on biological psychiatry. It is a free open access series. We also upload this recording on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to like, subscribe, and share that. If you're not a member of IABP, I urge you to become one if you have a keen interest in biological psychiatry. Though the newsletter is not only restricted to our members, but if you're not a member, you may not get a copy directly. So in case if you all want one, please write to us or message us. I think my number is pretty easily available to anybody. And with this, I once again thank my esteemed colleagues who take out their precious time and efforts, and not just for presenting today, but also it takes hours and hours of work behind making the presentation and years of experience and decades of learnings. So thank you so much for putting that so succinctly for us at all times. And our young psychiatrists who act as moderators and contributors, I think they are our future, and we are blessed to have them amongst us. So Dr. Hema Tharoor and Dr. Gayatri, I'm highly obliged. Thank you very much. And of course, Dr. Professor Garg is always there to preside and to help. And like I said, literally handhold me from everywhere. We are also very, very happy to share with you that we have colleagues from Nepal and Sri Lanka joining in on our CME series, they from what personal feedbacks that I get, they are happy that we are doing this, and hopefully more and more of their members want to join us and learn as well, because sharing is learning. So thank you so much for all the delegates who always join in. And there with us late night, a lot of young enthusiasts, and with the question answers, really the discussion is what makes a CME successful. So once again, thank you so much, and congratulations to everyone who've gained some insights today. And with that, I bid you all good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.